we go. All right, welcome. Today we're going to do some more secrets of Neville Goddard, how to decode it and give not just the information, but maybe a technique that'll at least loosen up the neurology to figure out ways to implement what he is or what he's talking about. Because a lot of times, whether it's visualizations, affirmations, or as Tony Robbins calls them, incantations, all these things, a positive attitude. A lot of people will, the first time they're exposed to it, they have success, right? Because they're doing something that's like different in their heads. But many people, they get into this and the information's good. But then as some people would say, okay, I like the information. I like the outline. I know what you're talking about. Now, how do I do it? Right? What's the next? What do we do next? Right? It's kind of like, when you go back to the 70s, when the big speakers were Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar, those of us that remember that, right? It was great information. And Zig Ziglar was the motivation guy. But you walk out of the seminar all motivated. And by the time you get home, you're like, what the hell was that? There was no there. There was like, get a checkup from the neck up. You need an attitude adjustment. You need this. It's good stuff. People are jumping up and down. Even in Tony's thing, sometimes it's motivating, but how long does it stay through time? Right? And so why not look at it the next level? And there's a lot of reasons for that. When Neville Goddard and Napoleon Hill and those guys were first starting this, they were kind of pushing the boundary at that point. So anyway, today, let's talk about two things that, I'll always say, just like when I'm teaching NLP, one of my favorite techniques, no matter what technique I'm teaching, but two of the things Neville Goddard talked about that I really, really like, right? And these are the most, he talked about a couple of the most misunderstood quotes to use the Christian analogy, the Bible. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the other spiritual texts have the same story. They all have the same stories in slightly different ways. But he talked about the faith of a mustard seed and the story of the prodigal son, right? We'll start with faith of a mustard seed. And you always hear people say this only takes a little bit of faith, a tiny bit of faith, the faith of a mustard seed. And mustard seeds are small, right? But he talked about when people say that, the first thing he says is, no, it's the opposite. It's not a little bit of faith. It's absolute belief and faith in what you're doing. It's not a little bit of faith. You have to have absolute faith, right? And he used the analogy of, if you plant a mustard seed and it's small, it is small, but it grows into a mustard plants, trees are big, I'll use like an apple tree or an acorn, they're small, an apple seed or an acorn, they're small, but they grow this. First of all, the only thing that seed can become is what it was, a mustard plant, a apple tree, or a mighty oak, right? You don't plant one and expect something else. You're going to, and he would stress, and it's true, you plant the seeds that you want to sow later on, right? And you have to really be you have to believe in it, right? And then it has to be planted in fertile ground, right? I live in Florida, great place to live, but a lot of, as much as this place is a semi-tropical, as Bruce can tell you, and all that, a lot of stuff don't grow down here, right? It's too hot, it's too wet. A lot of it is too hot, too much sun. And so, you have to plant it in the right time and in the right season, right? But then the other thing you would talk about with the planting the mustard seed, once you plant the mustard seed, or once you plant the seed of whatever you're trying to manifest, trying to create, trying to do, then you have to leave it alone. You have to nurture it, like water it and give it the nurturing that it needs. But the way that you do that is to keep reaffirming it, right? But you don't dig the damn thing up and look at it. How many of us, right, dig it up to look at, like, where is the, where's the evidence that this tree is going to grow? Where's the evidence that this thing I'm trying to manifest is happening? And kind of a subtext to this is he's the first guy I ever heard say, the signs follow, they don't precede. You see the signs of the growth after you've achieved it. Then you look back and go, oh yeah, this happened, that happened, and all these other things, right? It's the opposite thinking than what we're used to. So, when you hear people say, oh, it only takes a tiny bit of faith, it's disingenuous, because you have to have absolute faith in what you're doing, which leads, if you don't have absolute faith, you haven't changed the beliefs and the sense of knowing that it takes to do what you need to do. Right? Then you're holding two thoughts. You planted the seed, but you're not nurturing it. You say you want to be a successful businessman, financially secure, and you're trying to plant that seed, but at the same time, all you keep doing is looking at your bills and saying, I don't have enough money. So you're, as he would say, you're putting poison water on your plant, right? And the hard part of that is visualize. Once you plant the seed, like the acorn, you visualize the oak tree, right? That's all you keep visualizing, right? And one of his books somewhere, he talks about, like, when an architect designs a building, the first architect does the scale drawing. This is what I want, right? The Dubai Tower, or even go back a ways, like the Empire State Building. They see it, right? And the true master architects hand it off to other people to do the details. The structure, the electrical, all those little details that have to be done. They start with the big picture, and that's what they see. They look at some people would make fun of this kind of stuff, but they'll look at it, and they'll visualize. I hate to use this analogy, but it popped in my head. Trump Tower, when he went to build Trump Tower at that point, I think it was the 70s. That wasn't a good piece of land in New York, right? And so, but he visualized that, and he was the guy that planted the seed. He didn't design the building. He didn't put the structure together. He did what it was, right? And so, can you have that absolute faith of a mustard seed, right? Which is not tiny, it's absolute, right? And then you have to, again, put it in the proper place, right? And give it the nurturing that it needs. And the nurturing that it needs is feeding the vision that you have, and you feed it with feeling, not with just pictures or words. What is the feeling? Because I think his biggest book is Faith. Feeling is the secret, right? So if you get that vision, can you feel it? And does it feel true, right? So if you say you want to be financially successful, you have to be able to feel that, which can be a stretch if you've never been financially successful, right? And I would say it's like people, like I try to do this at other places where people aren't ready for it. And they'll always say, I want to be a billionaire. And I'm like, you have no concept of even what a 6-figure salary is. So how can you visualize, and the analogy I would use then, even if you got a few $1,000,000, you would end up like the lotto winners or the professional athletes that get a $40 million deal. And 5 years later, they're back on the street, right? You see those stories all the time. And a lot of people go, and what is the people that, I read a story about a guy who won $2 million in the lotto. And he leveraged it into, I think, $100 million business, right? And everybody, I want to do what he does. Well, first of all, he had a small successful insurance company. So let's let you know, he understood what he wanted to do with the money. He didn't go buy I always think of a guy from my hometown. John will remember him, is Glenn Robinson, first round draft pick in the NBA, got that big contract. First thing he did is he bought a Ferrari. And then after he got it delivered, it was pointed out, you're 6'11". You are not going to fit in a Ferrari. No, you can't customize one to sit in a Ferrari. You hear, yeah, I guess Shaq kind of did that once too. It's like, it's a pretty car, but I can't get in it, right? And so he ended up having to he gave the Ferrari, because he tells the story that then when he went to give it back, that $300,000 car is now worth about $190,000. So he gave it to his nephew, who within 6 months sold it for crack. Right? Probably just for a little bit of crack, right? So anyway, so that's the faith of a mustard seed. It's absolute, it's not tall. And it's one of those that we could do a long talk on what is absolute faith, right? And one would be the best analogy I heard him talk about, and it was in some other thing, but he said, if I ask you your name, you tell me your name, and you have faith, and you know that that's your name. Correct? I mean, I'm pretty sure people can relate to that, right? That's the kind of faith. So if you can have that kind of faith, and it comes through time, you have to really, really believe it, right? And feel it, and, it's absolute knowing, it's absolute faith. So that's faith of a mustard seed, right? And so again, the most important thing is to figure out, what seeds do you truly want to plant, right? Not what society tells you, not what, family may tell you, right? And then, by the way, once you plant the seed, it's got to be put away. And kind of like, you don't tell a lot of people what you're working toward, right? Because sometimes the people you think would support you, they don't. And secondly, even if they kind of support you, well, if you get what you want, how's this going to affect me? Right? And so you could get that, little bit of negativity blowback. And then again, the best way to hold that faith is to plant your seed in fertile ground, keep feeding it, but no one else has to know what you planted, right? Let them see the tree, is in one of his things he talked about, see the results. Cool. And then we'll tie this in with, which is one of my favorites because it goes against the Judeo-Christian work ethic at times, which is the prodigal son, right? That where the one brother's out just acting like a lot of us act in our young years, not helping the family business or the family, I think it was the kingdom thing. But anyway, he was gone. He was out, basically destroying. And he comes back a beaten man, right? And Neville says, well, that once you hit that point, and I'll tag that into recovery, once you hit that point of desperation, once you hit the point of surrendering, then you're ready to change. And when he comes back into the fold, his father gives him the keys to the kingdom. Right? He didn't work for it. He got it by the grace of his father, right? And Neville Goddard's talked about that's what the whole, the metaphor of this story is, that, it's there for you. You don't have to earn it. So you don't have to do this. God, if you let me become financially successful, I'll give them $100,000 a year to the St. Jude's Children's Hospital or whatever. And many of us cut those deals because we think we have to earn it or deserve it. If you look at the story of the prodigal son, and he really didn't, from the Judeo-Christian work ethic. And I wish Neville Goddard was still alive, because then you could ask him, how a lot of these kind of texts and these metaphors in the Bible have been slanted to keep us from being successful, right? You don't deserve that, right? And again, this is another one why if you're going to do that and plant your seed, I tie these two together, someone will say, well, what makes you think you deserve to be financially successful? Why should you get a lead in a major motion picture? Right? And then even people around you say, well, you didn't. How many times you hear, you got to take the certain steps, right? You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this to get to that final thing. And so that's, the way that it works, even though in our world every day, we see the examples of people that their first foray into whatever they're doing is at the highest level. They didn't go, because everyone knows you can't become president without at least serving in some branch of the military or the government, right? And I think it was like, I forget how many of our senators which is, what, third highest thing you can get elected to. That was their first office. It's like they didn't, and that's where you see a lot of them, they don't understand government. I'm not making fun of them. They don't, they were a football coach at Auburn, or they were a successful businessman, but that doesn't mean you understand, how government works. And I'm not saying they can't be good, but it's that's what they wanted to be. And as one of them said, well, I didn't want to be a congressman. I wanted to be a senator. Okay. Or a governor, those kind of offices, right? Even though most people would look at, no, you got to do like Jimmy Carter. He got on I think it was a school board, then the county commissioners, then he was governor of Georgia, then he ran for president, right? Right? But no, so he worked his way up. But then you get Ronald Reagan walked in, his first thing in government was governor of the largest state in America. And no political, whether you like these guys or not, right? This or that, right? So anyway, so that's the idea of the prodigal son, that if you plant the seed, you have to really feel, you don't have to feel like you have to go earn it. It will be at the grace of God that'll happen. And I tie that back into the recovery world, because you always hear people in recovery, if they use the 12-step approach, which is they got the reprieve from the addiction through grace. People don't walk into AA after saving a bus full of nuns and crippled kids, right? Most people walk into a tough crowd. Most people walk into AA after a DUI, the family's done, they just got out of jail, they got, and then, 2 years later, they got their life back together. So it's the idea of grace, and that, we go into that thinking it's about deserving, right? When in fact, it's just a gift. And that's where people say it's a gift from God, right place, right time, right? And his name escapes me, but anyway, his first big break in motion pictures was, he was just in the right place at the right time, right? And he didn't like to network. I got to find out who it was, right? He wasn't a good networker, because he's a really good actor. A lot of really good actors are very introverted. But he was at some event and somebody said, oh, whatever to him. And the person was like a producer, kind of a showrunner kind, and said, well, you got an interesting look, and all he said to the guys, well, if you ever think I could help you out or do a role for you, let me know. Right. And he goes, I usually wouldn't say those kind of things. Right. And so, boom, it leads to, his I forget what it was, his breakout role. Right. Right. And so, yeah, and so you always hear those kind of stories. It's the grace, and that's the prodigal son, right? So when you go back to your planting that seed, You know, what do you really want? Not what you think you deserve. Because I'm always saying, thank God I got the grace of God, not what I deserved. You know, because I probably would have served big time. You know, so, but can you accept that, right? And again, some of the people around you, that's where you want to be careful about sharing the seeds you're planting. And when it comes in accepting, because they'll, like in the story in the Bible, what's his name, the prodigal son, but the brothers weren't happy, right? I think they tried to kill him, if I remember right, because you're taking away their kingdom. You know, and I know supposedly in the story, it goes on like there's plenty for everybody. There's no shortage, right? You know, so, you know, can you have that, you know, prosperity attitude when you think about what you want? And not my only political statement would be, or do you think like some people that no, we have to cut old people's Social Security because there's only so much money? I'm like, last time I checked, nah, that's pretty much government can just print more. You know, that's a different discussion, but why beat up? So what's your seeds you want to plant, you know, in a fertile ground, and then you have to keep your eye on the goal, right? And then when it comes, just accept it. That's the prodigal son, right? And as this is for John, as our dear friend Tony Robbins would say, don't worry about the how. You know, you're Andrew Lloyd Wright. You designed the building, right? You're not, I froze for a minute. You designed the building, right? You're not, the electrical people will design the electrical system, right? This will happen, that'll happen, right? So now we'll do a technique, you know, and really when you think about it this way, then you know, if you're trained in NLP or even some of the hypnosis techniques, my goal in these things is to just kind of get the juices flowing, right? So maybe you can create your own technique to help you overcome, you know, whatever the problem is on planting the seed. Do you dig the thing up constantly? Make sure it's still growing? Do you stand there and scream at the ground, right? Or do you say it has to grow a certain way? Right? Or whatever the problem is, you need to, I keep freezing up. So anyway, here's a technique, right? And it kind of ties in with the prodigal son. So just get centered and grounded and close your eyes for a moment. I'm going to turn off the camera because that way it'll stop some of the pixelating, at least I'm getting, right? And so what I want you to do is think about a time in your life where you had a miracle happen, right? Maybe it was like a gift from God, you know, and it wasn't something that you did step 1, step 2, step 3. It wasn't like getting a bachelor's degree. You had certain steps. Suddenly you got this gift, right? So your brain can kind of remember that, right? If you had a miracle, you know, it's only after the miracle happens that you look back and see, oh, this happened. And I said, you know, I reached out to this person who introduced me to that person. Then I end up with the perfect job. You know, I bought a newspaper. I was talking to somebody, this actually happened to me, where was looking for a job, had a specific kind of job they wanted, couldn't seem to find it. Then one day, tried some of these techniques, read a newspaper this is back in the days where we used newspapers, bought a paper they never read, looked in the want ads, and there was the job, right? And so what made them buy that newspaper? Sometimes those parts you can't answer, you know? And you don't try to decode it. You don't try to say, why did they advertise in this newspaper but not that newspaper? He just picked the right paper. And that was through the grace, right? And first he planted the seed. He knew what kind of job he wanted, right? And he visualized it and stepped into it. And it was really 3 or 4 steps above where most people would say his next job should be. So if you ever had an experience like that, where you got the grace, where you got the feeling, and you were able to achieve it. And so now think of a seed you would like to plant that no one will ever know but you. And imagine it as a small seed, right? And so plant it in the recesses, the fertile recesses of your mind. And know that what it needs to nurture it is love, care, nurturing, faith. You know, and the only thing that seed can give you is what you're planting. You know, and some seeds grow quickly, like corn and wheat. Some take a little bit longer. But think about that. Now what I want you to do is just keep that idea. Now imagine looking in the mirror of as you are today. And when you look in the mirror, you realize your past is not a map to your future. It was a map to where you are right now. And if you want something in the future, you probably have to change what's going on. But what I want you to do is, as you're looking into this mirror, I want you to see yourself as the prodigal son or daughter, right? And that you've had those experiences of receiving grace. And know that all those things in your past that's behind you as you look in the mirror, seeing yesterday and the day before and the day before, got you to where you're at. Some of those miraculous happenings were a gift. And know that you're ready to receive the next gift. And so by planting that seed, I want you to look past your image today and step through it, and then see yourself. See, hear, feel, know that you're living this new life of the seed you planted, whatever it was, financial, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever it was, you're living it. And you know that it's true. You know that it's true. Same way you know your name. And you can look into the mirror of this future you, and you see yourself way back there today practicing this technique. And you may not know all the steps it took to get from way back there to where you're going to be. But know that everything's flexible. Everything is flexible. And it can happen much quicker than you think. It's almost like there's a bungee cord attached. And so as you step out of this future you keep that bungee cord, you come back to today and you see yourself as you are, you know, and you have talents, abilities, and skills. Only you can do what you were put here to do. No one can do what you could do. And this seed that you planted, this goal that you want, the actual idea of it was a gift from God, right? And your wants are actually God whispers. And all you have to do is be ready to accept it. And so as you see that future you who has it, and you jump back to today and you see it in the future, your last thought is, it is done. And it's time to be reborn, which we'll talk about later. Okay. So open your eyes, come on back. Cool. All right. All right. So I just wanted to do that. I'm trying to keep these short. I get too talky. Next week, I think we'll talk about, there's a study done by the Department of Defense. I think it was mainly through the Army, through the Stargate program, where they tested people's DNA and how a lot of this stuff that we're teaching there's some scientific evidence the way it works in your DNA, but we'll talk about that next time. So I hope everyone has a great day, a great week, and just if you have any questions, just reach out.